This one's on. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to our Tuesday night meeting. It's so nice to see so many of you here. I see some bridge players here, but Dan is not going to be discussing bridge tonight. Our speaker tonight is Dan Marshall from the Southern Legal Council here in Gainesville, and he's going to tell you all about the work that they do here. What do I remember about Dan besides how he plays bridge? He grew up in Pennsylvania. He became a lawyer, I believe, from Yukon, although he might correct that. Moved to South Florida, lived there for about 20 years, and has been in Gainesville working for this organization for about 3 years. Before I turn the mic over to him, I just want to let you know that our meeting next month, second Tuesday of the month, 7 o'clock, will feature Jackie Davison from the Lynx Bookstore. She will be talking about banned books in Florida and legislation that's happened and what's going on there. So, all right, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? All right, great. So pleasure to be here. Before I start talking about Southern Legal Council, I just give a little bit more background about myself so that you know kind of where I'm coming from. As Mary said, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I went to undergrad in upstate New York and actually got my first degree was in physics and astronomy. And so then I worked for about a year now down at Goddard Space Flight Center near Washington, D.C. Decided that's not what I wanted to do and ended up going to law school in Connecticut, like Mary said, and came down to Florida after that. My background as an attorney, I started out as a public defender down in West Palm Beach. So I had many, many years of experience doing criminal defense work there. And then I was out, I had, with a partner, I had our own private firm for a little bit, decided that I did not like being a businessman. I would want to just do law. So I then moved on to a civil rights firm down in South Florida that did prisoner civil rights. And then, as Mary said, about 3 years ago, I came up here to join Southern Legal Council. So the Southern Legal Council is, it's a civil rights organization based here in Gainesville. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, my clicker's not working here. There we go. All right, so nonprofit civil rights organization. We're essentially a law firm, but we are not we're not out to make money. It's not your typical law firm that's trying to, bring in business and make millionaires out of all the partners and everything like that. So we're a nonprofit civil rights organization. We're based here in Gainesville, but we handle cases all over the state of Florida. We have cases in Jacksonville, Tallahassee, Tampa, down to Miami, basically everywhere in the state. Go ahead to the next slide. The organization was formed in 1977. It was initially part of the University of Florida as a governmental oversight kind of like clinic in the university. But at this time, this is right after the Watergate period. And one of the things that the organization wanted to do was government oversight, public records, suing the government when it stepped out of line, and that was not going to be possible if it remained part of the university. And so back in 1977, it split off so that it could be free of basically independent and not influenced by any of the politics through the university. Right, go ahead to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so fast forwarding to today. Southern Legal Council over the past couple of years has actually grown a lot. We've basically doubled in size since I've started in the past 3 years. We have a few core areas that we have been a long history of litigating in and advancing civil rights in. I list a few of these here. First Amendment rights. We have a project that we call Decriminalizing Poverty, and what that is we bring cases where we're challenging ordinances and laws that cities and counties pass that are essentially trying to drive homeless people out of the city, but what they do is they criminalize things that homeless people need to do in order to live. So they make it a crime to, camp in the park, or a crime to ask for money, or a crime to share food with people, those kinds of things. So we've challenged those laws throughout the state. We have one of the longest history at SLC is working with disability rights and education. I'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to one of the example cases that I have, but basically we advocate on behalf of children who have disabilities and are in the public school system, and under federal law, they're entitled to get certain services and benefits from the schools. And so we advocate and meet with the schools and advocate on their behalf so that making sure they get those things. We have, this is a little more recent, but we've done, and our organization is actually one of the ones in the forefront in Florida on LGBTQ advocacy. Obviously, that's been a hot topic in the news recently, and it's been a lot of different ways that our clients in that regard are being challenged, and that we're challenging some of the state's actions in the court system. And then finally, this is a little tangential to some of the other stuff that we do, but a lot of the work, since we are, keeping the government honest and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to, a lot of our investigation in these cases involves asking for public records from government agencies. And sometimes our initial investigation turns from a decriminalizing poverty case into a public records case when whatever government agency doesn't respond to our public records request, or says records are exempt or something like that. So we end up having to litigate public records cases sometimes as well. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, and then like I said, we recently have been expanding into new areas. We've been fortunate to have been able to grow recently, and so we've hired about 3 or 4 new attorneys who have allowed us to branch out into these new areas that I've listed here. Consumer protection, where basically we've been fighting some debt collection cases where our clients have been accused of not paying money back. Give you one example there. Somebody had their identity stolen, and then the person who stole identity racked up like $13,000 worth of credit card charges with the stolen identity. And then, of course, that credit card, when that doesn't get paid back, the credit card company comes after our client, who knows nothing about it until they get the letter in the mail, the collections letter in the mail. And so that's one of the things where we go and defend people in court on that. I see a question. Oh, is that better? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, and then some other areas that we've been adding recently as well: disability and public benefits, things like Social Security, disability benefits, and those kinds of things. Fair housing, helping people with evictions and making sure they're not facing. We got a lot of like corporate type landlords who have been buying up a lot of properties recently to make sure they're not charging like illegal fees or anything like that. And then also Medicaid access and denials of care in the Medicaid arena as well. Next. Sorry. Got it. Oh, there we go. All right. So here we are. This is our team. This is the attorneys in our office, and like in the middle there with the glasses is Jody Siegel. She's our executive director and has been there almost since the organization was founded. She came in the early 80s to the organization. So she does a great job. We do great work. So that's the legal team there. Go ahead. All right, and here we are at work. So you see us there with some of our clients and outside the courthouse and the court hearings that we go to. You can go ahead and on to the next one. Okay, so tonight what I want to do is I'm just going to talk about some of the cases that we've brought recently. This will kind of give you an idea of the work that we do. One of the great things about Southern Legal Counsel is that we have the opportunity to bring systemic cases. So, you know, when I was a public defender, I was handling a bunch of individual clients, and obviously their court cases were very important to them. But I wasn't, when I'm defending somebody in the public defender's office, I'm not changing the system. I'm just helping kind of one person at a time. At Southern Legal Counsel, we have the chance to, you know, help individual clients, but the outcomes we get in our case for this client then affects hundreds or maybe thousands of other people who are in the same situation. So I'm going to talk about 5 of our cases tonight and kind of give you kind of a flavor of the type of work that we do at Southern Legal Counsel. So go ahead. Okay, so the first case, this is part of our Decriminalizing Poverty program. In this case, Daytona Beach passed an ordinance where, again, the purpose is pretty clear from the city council meetings, is to drive homeless people out of the city. That was their real goal here. But what they did was they made it illegal for people to ask for immediate donations in certain areas around the city. And of course, these areas are the ones that are most likely, you know, intersections in the boardwalk, the places where it's actually, you know, panhandlers are able to get some money. So, so this is what they did. They banned panhandling in a bunch of different places. Go ahead to the next slide. So we filed a lawsuit on behalf of several homeless individuals who panhandled in the city. Our main argument was that this law, it was discriminatory in that it banned certain kinds of speech, the requests for money, but did not ban other types of speech that would have the exact same harms that the request for money would. So, for example, the city was saying, well, you can't ask for money at traffic intersections because it's a traffic hazard, and it's dangerous. But they banned asking for money, but they didn't ban asking for anything else. So if you want to ask for directions, or you want to ask for a signature on a petition, or you want to, in the same spot, that's okay. But you just can't ask for money. And so, you know, it's pretty clear that they're targeting a specific kind of speech here. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so these are 3 of our clients in Daytona Beach. And so, as I said, under the law, if Doug right here, this is Doug, he spent most of the time on the boardwalk just holding a sign saying, you know, the typical homeless, please help. He can't do that. That's illegal under the law. If you get Chad up at the top with the hat, he can't, you know, be at the intersection holding his hat out, showing he needs money. This is George over here. George actually makes some really awesome palm frond roses. I don't know if you've ever seen them. Like if you saw them in stores, tourists would buy them. But so he would take these palm fronds and make little, you know, handmade roses out of them, and then sell those to people. And that also illegal under the ordinance that Daytona Beach passed. So go ahead to the next. Okay, and so just to illustrate the dichotomy here, these people are not our clients. And all the things here that they're doing is perfectly fine. So if you're the Jehovah's Witnesses on the boardwalk and you want to pass out your materials, that's okay. If you want to advertise the business down the street on the street corner, that's okay. If you want to scalp tickets outside the International Speedway, that's okay. Go ahead to the next. Okay, so we get to court, and when things are discriminate between topics of speech, that's one of the things that is basically, it is really tough for a city to defend that in court. The 99.99 out of 100, that is unconstitutional for obvious reasons. And so here we end up in court. We're in front of a actually fairly conservative judge, who immediately grants us a preliminary injunction, says, no, this ordinance is unconstitutional, you can't enforce it. And then we go through the whole litigation process, and about a year and a half later, the judge says, no, I really meant it the first time. This is unconstitutional, and entered a permanent injunction, enjoining the enforcement of the ordinance. Now, this case is currently on appeal in the 11th Circuit. Daytona Beach is not giving up. And so we're in the position of defending the injunction that we won in the trial court at this point on appeal. And we are expecting with the judge's oral argument on this back in the fall, and we're expecting a decision here in a few months, probably in the spring sometime. But one of the reasons why this case is so important is that Daytona Beach, there was an attorney who was kind of going around the city saying, hey, I have an ordinance that will pass constitutional muster and then bans panhandling. And Daytona Beach is one of the cities that adopted it, but there are a bunch of other ones in Florida that also adopted it. And so whatever happens on this case is going to affect all those other cities as well. And so that's kind of what I was saying about how we're able to bring systemic cases that have larger impact than for just our clients in these cases. Good. Okay, so this case, this is Mr. Roll. He was arrested for an ordinance violation in St. Petersburg. And normally in the United States, you hear it a million times on TV. When you get arrested, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney. Not in St. Petersburg, you didn't. So he got arrested for an ordinance violation, got taken to court, was put in jail. They did not give him an attorney. He was sentenced to, I forget if it was 10 days or 30 days in jail. And this, again, as you can probably guess, he's not the only person that this happened to. They had basically this was the practice of St. Petersburg and the court in St. Petersburg. And so at Southern Legal Counsel, along with the ACLU, we brought a motion on behalf of Mr. Roll to overturn that sentence. Go ahead. And in the end, again, this is a pretty clear violation of the constitutional right to an attorney. And so once the court realized it, I think part of what was going on here is it's kind of, they had a newer judge. It's just the way they'd always been doing it. And they didn't really realize that what they were doing wasn't right. And so, once we got in front of them, the judge resentenced our client to no jail time. But it was funny sitting in court that day, because right before we argued our motion, the judge was making a very pointed remarks to basically everybody in the courtroom, saying, all right, we don't sentence people to jail here anymore. Because clearly, she had read our motion and realized that their practice was not constitutional, and so they needed to change. And so because of this case, again, we were able to end that practice, and there are a whole bunch of people who would have gone to jail illegally who are not now at this point. Okay, so this one, I know it's League of Women Voters, so I figure I've got to throw one voting case in here. So this is the Floridians for Protecting Freedom versus ACA, which is one of the state agencies. It's the Agency for Healthcare Administration. You may or may not recall, back in the 2024 election, there was an amendment on the ballot to amend the Florida Constitution to protect the right to abortion. It was Amendment 4. The state very, very vehemently did not want that amendment to pass. And so they were doing everything in their power to undermine, there were lawsuits about keeping it off the ballot in the first place, which the state lost, and it ended up on the ballot. But even after it got on the ballot, Go back there for a sec. Even after, can you go back? We're going the wrong way, but that's okay. So I'll so just to talk about the Amendment 4 stuff. So they created a website that had a whole bunch of information about Amendment 4, most of which was false or misleading about, there we go, which was just outright false about what the amendment would do if it was passed. They also, even worse, there's this huge campaigns on both sides about yes, vote for 4, no, don't vote for 4. And as part of that, the group that the Floridians Protecting Freedom, who was pro Amendment 4, was putting advertising out there. And the state, through its prosecution arm, was sending out letters to radio stations and TV stations saying, we will prosecute you if you play these advertisements on your TV or your radio. Clearly, this is so chilling to political speech that clearly a violation of the First Amendment on that one. So Southern Legal Counsel, we were part of the team. There were a bunch of organizations involved in this, but we were part of the team that were challenging these actions by the state to undermine Amendment 4. You can go ahead on to the next one. And so we were part of 2 lawsuits. The first one was challenging the state putting out disinformation and false information about Amendment 4. I thought we had a pretty big case, but the judge didn't agree. And it's funny, the judge didn't rule on the state stuff was false or it wasn't false. I don't think the judge wanted to get into parsing, is this true or is this not true? Basically, the judge's ruling was essentially that there's a thing in the law called standing, and it is basically saying that once something's on the ballot, that you don't have standing, like you're not Floridians Protecting Freedom, you're not personally harmed if the state says something that's false about this amendment. And so the judge basically got rid of the lawsuit that way. In the second case, however, the federal district court judge agreed with, like I said, I think it's a pretty clear violation of the chilling effect of these threatened prosecutions, and enjoined the state from being able to prosecute any of the radio or TV stations for playing these commercials. Unfortunately, at that point, though, this is in the midst of an election, everything's moving really fast, and a lot of harm was done already at that point. Because, I mean, if you're running a radio station, do you really want to risk, is the money for playing a commercial really worth the risk of having the state, not even if they don't prosecute, just having them on your bad side? And so even though the state enjoined, the judge enjoined the state from being able to enforce things, there were still some stations that were not willing to play the ads at that point. So go ahead. Okay, so this next one, it sounds like these keep getting worse and worse, but okay. So this one, the Pasco County, this is just a little bit north of Tampa, and the sheriff there came up with this program where they were going to use data to be able to figure out who's likely to commit crimes in the future. And it's exactly as bad as it sounds. It's a very minority report. And so and then on top of that, what they would do is once they have their list of the people they think are going to, they would go out and harass these people. They'd follow them around. They'd go up to their house at all times of day and night. They'd cite them for every little thing, like your grass is too long, or, every little thing that everybody else is not being cited for. And include a little bit of it here, but these aren't, there's some other stuff in their factors too, but some of these factors, you're like, what? Okay, criminal history, I get. If you've been arrested before, maybe you're more likely. But if you've been the victim of a crime, you're more likely to commit a crime in the future. If you've been a witness to a crime, you're more likely. And so you'd get some, essentially what pops out of this is if you live in a poorer neighborhood that has lots of crime, you're more likely to commit crime. And so, but that's the effect they wanted, because those are the people they wanted to be able to go and target. They also had a second program that also it wasn't quite as bad, because like they weren't going out and citing the kids and that kind of stuff, but they would basically use the same thing for the kids in school, but they had different factors for that. But it's the same thing of you look at factors and then try to figure out which kids are going to be problems in the future. So go ahead. So an organization called CARE filed public records requests because they wanted to see how this program was being implemented. They didn't want any information about individual people, but they were looking for demographic information. Is this, like everybody was thinking, is this being enforced more against minorities? Is this, how are you calculating this stuff? And so they filed a public records request. And the sheriff turned over some of the records, but not the ones that they really wanted to be able to figure out what was actually going on with the program. And so over the course of more than a year, there was back and forth, and the sheriff's office was refusing to give up these records, and they were claiming it was exempt under the public records laws. And so we and a couple other organizations stepped in and filed a public records lawsuit on behalf of and so shockingly, a few days before the court hearing on our case was about to happen, the sheriff determined that these records were no longer exempt and gave them to us. So after almost 2 years of saying they were exempt and not turning it over, because they didn't want to have to try and defend this in front of a judge. And so the issue, though, one of the good things about the Public Records Act is if you win, you get attorney's fees. And so it was whether they illegally withheld the records was still an issue in the case, because that determined whether we get attorney's fees or not. And so we were still able to get the courts to find that what the sheriff did was illegal. And ultimately, so on top of eventually getting the records, we also were able to get a very good appellate court opinion that clarified when the Public Records Act applies and when the exemptions apply that the sheriff was trying to bring in. And it was in our favor, and it was in favor of open records in the government. And so not only did we get the records here, but we basically then foreclosed any other sheriff or any other place around the state from trying to raise the same arguments in any future cases that might come up. Okay, so I know all of that was kind of a downer. So the last case here that I want to talk about is I took the name out there because the person is a minor, but this is in Hernando County. Like I said, one of the types of cases that we do is advocating for children with disabilities in schools. And under the federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, that is a mouthful, but it also means that schools have to put in the resources and have to give kids with disabilities the same opportunity, the same access to get an education that all the other kids have. And so this was put into place. It's been the law for decades now, but it was put in place to solve the problem of, the kids with disabilities, or like, for example, our client here who has autism, who you normally would just be, pushed off to the side, not really given any kind of any teaching, go color, go, do these worksheets and kind of forgotten. So that's what this law is in place to prevent. So in comes our client, who is a third grader with autism and other disabilities as well. And he's in school in Hernando County, and one of the realities of these types of cases is more expensive to educate kids with disabilities because they're entitled to more services. And so the schools tend to, without advocacy on behalf of the kids, they will do kind of the bare minimum because it costs them money to make sure the kids are getting everything that they're entitled to. And so here we see kind of that in action, where the kid is placed into a classroom with other kids with disabilities. One of the main things under the Federal Act is that to every extent possible, you want kids with disabilities to be in classrooms with other kids without disabilities as well. You want them to have as normal at school environment as you can, because it's been shown kids learn better that way. They socialize better with other kids that way. There's all kinds of benefits to it. And so if possible, you want to put them in an environment in a normal school setting and not have them off by themselves with only other kids with disabilities. And so here they had him in a room with kids with other disabilities. He was having behavior problems that weren't, they weren't handling, they weren't being addressed. And so they ended up putting him exactly what the act is designed to prevent, but they have him in a place that it's all by himself and not really getting an education. He's not there along the same amount of time as other kids. Okay, so we step in, and under the Federal Act, you don't go straight to court. So one of the things that we do is, it's not just under here, there's other areas where the first thing you do is go to what's called administrative hearings and due process hearings, where you don't start out in court. You only go to court if you go to these hearings first, and then you don't get what you want, then you can end up in court. But so we go to these to a hearing on this one, and one of the good things here with the administrative hearings, and especially with schools, is the kid's still in school, so you're constantly talking with the school administrators, and so sometimes you are able to settle things, and there's an incentive there because the school administrators know that no matter what happens, the kid's still going to be in their school, and so they don't want to do anything. They don't tend to go scorched earth in these kinds of cases, which is good. So in this case, we were able to, before the actual hearing, to get a settlement with the school, whereby we were able to get the school to agree to implement the services that he needed, to institute a different behavior plan to handle the behaviors that were going on in class. And again, shockingly, once the proper supports are in place, he's able to be in the normal classroom with the other kids, and there's no behavior problems, and he's doing much better in school now. I wish I could say that was true for every kid. This is not the outcome in every case, but when you see, this is a really good outcome here, and this is something that even though this particular case isn't a systemic type case, when you can see you can help a kid that much and just basically turn around his whole performance in school and his whole school experience for the better, that's why we do this. So, all right. So I think that's the last case that I had that I was going to talk about. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take and answer any questions you might have. I see a couple, but I think she's getting mics.
Okay, questions. Oh, we'll start way in the back. I need the exercise.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. But I'm struck with the similarity between the Southern Legal Council and the Southern Poverty Legal Council.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you were connected in any way.
Yes, so we're not officially connected with this. You're referring to the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're not officially connected. We do a lot of the same type of work. We work with them on some of our cases. I believe they were involved in, I want to say it was the care case with the Pasco County Sheriff's Office. I believe they were also involved in that case. So we do work with them on these cases. What the work that we do is very similar. We have some kind of different areas of expertise. Like on the LGBTQ and the decriminalizing poverty, like we are, probably in the state have the most experience on those kinds of cases. There are other types of cases that they have, more experience than we do on, and we work very closely with them.
How are you compensated? How's your firm compensated?
Say that again?
How is your firm compensated?
Compensated.
Yeah. Money.
Yeah, you're right. The important thing, right? So there's a few different ways. One is that we get money from the Florida Bar Foundation. There's us and a bunch of different organizations around the state who do like legal aid type work, get money from the Florida Bar Foundation. So that's one source of our income. The problem with that source is that it's restricted as to what we can do with it. So there are certain types of cases, like the Amendment 4 case, we can't use Bar Foundation money to do that. We had to use other resources to do that case. And so that's one source of income that we use. Another source of income is we get donations from, just the community, from people who believe in the work that we do. Another source of income, I kind of alluded to it a little bit with the public records cases, that some of the cases we bring, if we win them, we get attorney's fees on the case. That doesn't always happen, but in some types of cases, we get reimbursed for our fees that way. Okay.
Bob?
Thank you, Dan. That was great. Comment and a question. The comment is, listening to you talk about the jerks that run the state, I can't believe you haven't gone back to Connecticut. My comment. My question is, on the panhandling case, I'd be curious what Daytona's rationale is for going after panhandlers but not Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean,
Yeah.
What is their contorted legal analysis?
Yeah. So the real answer is they don't like panhandlers and they want them not to be in the city. The answer that they give isn't much better than that, but it's they're trying to argue that panhandlers cause unique problems that other things don't cause in some way, and they also are trying to argue that somehow this does not discriminate based on the message that's being conveyed, even though it clearly does. It hasn't gotten them anywhere so far in court. We'll see what the appellate court does with it. But like I said, they had, prior to passing this law, their concern was they had a lot of people who were kind of very aggressively panhandling that they wanted to take care of. And there are ways to prevent that and not do this. But they did this. And so there are other laws you can enforce that, if somebody's being disorderly, if somebody's, threatening, there are other laws you can charge them with rather than banning panhandling, but they weren't doing that. So
I have two questions, if I may.
Mhm.
I'd like to know the status for transgender children in the state and also women's rights.
Okay. So those are two really big questions. So for transgender, we have, but I didn't talk about them much tonight because I'm not the attorney I'm not the point person in those cases, but one of the attorneys in our office is kind of like one of the point person in the state on transgender issues. And it's unfortunate because we have brought several lawsuits challenging some of the state's policies about not allowing Medicaid to cover, transgender medical procedures, and not, preventing treatment of minors and those kinds of things. And we win those cases in the trial court, and then we get overturned in the appellate court because Florida is in a very conservative appellate court, the 11th Circuit, that covers us in Georgia and Alabama, and there's some very conservative judges up there at the moment. So it's tough to, put several years into a case and to win it initially and then to see all that work go away. So I wish I had better news for you on that front. In terms of women's rights, I don't know, was there any, yeah. So I am not aware of anything that is like imminent in that regard. I know back with the Amendment 4 thing in 2024, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of money to get a proposed amendment on the ballot. After doing that so recently, I don't know if the appetite is there to do it again, like in the near future. Not that it wouldn't ever be done, but I know. But at the same time, I can't claim to be on like the inside on where those decisions are being made. So, yeah.
Thank you again, Dan. This work sounds fantastic. I have two questions.
Mhm.
One is immigrants that are in detention center and applying for asylum.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that your organization can do to help that?
Yeah, so our organization doesn't do immigration cases. One of the big problems with that is when I was answering the funding question is, that's one of the restrictions. We can't use FFLA, the Bar Foundation money, to do immigration work. And so we just don't have the resources to handle those kinds of cases. There are some other organizations in Florida that are working on those things, but unfortunately not us.
Well, I appreciate that answer. And afterward, maybe if I could just check with you to see some of the other organizations, that'd be great.
Sure.
The second question is, tomorrow, the Florida Senate is going to be voting on requiring an ID to vote.
Mm.
And this is hitting women, I think everybody knows that, much harder, and also the elderly who want to have vote by mail. Do you have any comments on that, or do you prefer not to?
You get myself in trouble here. I think I will just leave it as I think that's a bad policy, but I don't know that I want to go further into that.
What are the most significant cases that the office has had in the last 10 years that you consider the most significant cases?
Wow. So some of the most significant cases back 10 years predates me in the office. But I think the most significant cases are the kind of the systemic work where we have been challenging, like I said, some of these laws about I think, like I said, the panhandling case will have wide impact all over the state. There's a couple other cases that basically brought lawsuits against other laws, like against food sharing. There's an organization called Food Not Bombs that, as part of their political message, they go out and share food with homeless people. And their food sharings were getting banned all over a bunch of different places. And so, we brought a case and won that, where the cities and towns can't just ban that outright. And so those types of cases, going back even further, I think this is probably even further back than the 10 years that you were talking about, but I know Jody talks sometimes about there used to be an institution for kids, Florida, the state institution, and this is all before my time, so I'm not sure I'm going to get all the details right, but apparently the kids there were being treated horribly. And so SLC was part of the group, was the group and part of the coalition that filed suit to change that practice as well. And so I believe that place was actually shut down because of the lawsuit.
I came in at the right time.
Okay.
I would ride with Al Hadid one of the founders, and Jody
Mhm.
to Tallahassee, through the Florida Center for Children and Youth. I was involved with the Guardian Ad Litem program. And I'm so pleased to hear how you're functioning, because that's how Al, who was never defensive, even his people that he really disliked or disliked what they were saying, he would engage them. And that's how he came up with positive results. And so I'm so pleased to see that Southern Legal is still doing so well. And congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Although retired, I still work with students informally, and I just talked to a pre-law student who wanted to either shadow, particularly a nonprofit organization, or do an internship. Is that something that your organization does?
Yes, absolutely. Every fall semester, spring semester, and the summer, we have a new crop of interns who comes in. And we have both undergrads and law students. Obviously, being right here, the majority of them are UF students, but we also have students from other schools as well. And yes, we welcome the people applying. I think the deadline just passed for this coming summer, but like I said, every semester we have a new set of applications.
Okay,
coming.
thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Just wait. Can you please explain food sharing?
Sure. So what happens is specifically Food Not Bombs, because that was our client in a couple of cases that we've been bringing. They will go to, it's a political organization, and their message is that we should be using our resources to help people in need and to help people who are hungry, and not use those resources on weapons and war and those kinds of things. And hence Food Not Bombs. And so what they will do is they'll go to some public places like parks or wherever it is in their particular city, and they'll bring food, and they will just offer food to anybody who is in need. Who they'll pass out their literature and put up signs, but then they'll also pass out food and share food with anybody in the community who's in need. Like I said, that there have been cities who don't want that to happen and have been passing ordinances to prevent that from happening. And that is also an infringement on that organization's First Amendment right to spread its message. And so those are, lawsuits that we've been bringing as well.
Okay.
It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm right or wrong, for the last couple of years, the Florida Supreme Court, sui sponte, on their own motion, without any motion made before them by any party, cut your funds or enunciated policies which required a substantial reduction in the funds that the Florida Bar Foundation was able to spend. Is that correct?
Kind of. So what happened, the SLC's gotten funding from the Florida Bar Foundation for years and years and years, since I've been there, long before I got there. And the money comes from when attorneys have money in their trust accounts from their clients. The money, it's not put in the attorney's bank account, it's put in a special trust account where it's set aside for the client. And those trust accounts earn interest. And so the interest from those trust accounts goes to the Florida Bar, and the Florida Bar uses that money through the Bar Foundation to fund things like legal aid and representation for indigent individuals and that kind of thing. So back maybe 10 years ago, when interest rates were tiny, the amount of money coming in from that was also tiny. And so the money that could be given out to legal aid organizations was tiny. Fast forward to more recently, the interest rates go up. The money coming in is way more than it used to be. And there are now the Florida Bar Foundation has a lot more money than it used to have to distribute. And so some, let's say it's political, but some people didn't like to see the money that was being given out to organizations like ours. And then was, like I said, we do trans work, we do some other work that some people find politically, they don't like it. And so some people were upset about where the money was going. And so that's where, when I was saying though, there's restrictions on the Bar Foundation money, those restrictions are not that old. They were put in place in the past couple of years about what we're able to do with the money that we get from the Bar Foundation. I think that's probably what you're referring to, because that's the Florida Supreme Court ultimately is the ones in charge of the bar and ultimately put those guidelines in place.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question. What led you to become this kind of lawyer?
Well, I don't know if I have a real satisfying answer for that. I just know, like when I was in law school, I knew that what I didn't want, like I didn't want to be, at the big firms just fighting over money every day and that kind of thing. So I knew I wanted to do something that was more than that. And that's probably what drew me to criminal law in the first place, was because obviously there's a lot more than money at stake there. And then once I got out and I was in the public defender's office for a while, and that was excellent experience. But like I said, you're impacting people one case at a time. And so what drew me to SLC and the other public interest organization I was with previously is really the chance to impact things systemically and for, change the rules as opposed to just helping one person at a time.
All right, let's give Dan another hand. Thank you very much. Given all the questions, I think your talk went over very well. Thank you very much.